This podcast was made on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, the Woiwurrung and the Bunurong. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and to emerging leaders. From the University of Melbourne's School of Psychological Sciences, this is PsychTalks.
Welcome back. Today we're talking about hormones, behaviour, and some of the ideas that have taken off online, like cycle syncing. There's a lot of messaging around how women should plan their exercise, their productivity, and even their competitiveness around the menstrual cycle. But what does the science actually say? We're joined by Lindsay Arthur to unpack research on hormones, behaviour, and competition, and to make sense of some of the most popular claims circulating online.
Lindsay's work focuses on hormones and competition, with a strong focus on women. Her research looks at how biological factors interact with behaviour and challenges some of the simplified stories we often hear about menstrual cycles and hormonal contraception.
Lindsay, welcome to PsychTalks. Could you start by telling us a little bit about your background and your general research interests?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Melbourne in the Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences. I started at UNSW, focused on neuropsychology with a double major in human resource management. Then I travelled for a while and I ended up going to LSE, or the London School of Economics, for my master's in social and organisational psychology. I thought I wanted to do consulting. I thought I wanted to work in that space. It just wasn't quite the right fit for my interests at the time. And so I decided to come back to Melbourne and do my PhD. My PhD, I suppose, was interested in how hormones influence behaviour, and particularly social behaviours. So the ways that both natural endogenous hormones and exogenous, so things like hormonal contraceptives, how they influence behaviour.
Now, that seems a fair step away from mainstream psychology. So what got you interested in the sort of biological aspects of behaviour?
To be honest, I just kind of stumbled into it. I was interested in doing a PhD with Candace because we'd already worked together at UNSW. And then when we were discussing topics, the idea of hormonal contraceptives came up, and I thought, well, that would be really interesting. I bit off infinitely more than I probably should have. I had to do courses in biology. I had a very more traditional psychology background. So yeah, that was definitely a challenge at the start of my PhD. When I look back to my notes, I have a note from very, very early on saying, what does endogenous mean? And yeah, it's crazy to see how far I came in those 4 or 5 years. But it was definitely an organic, just following my nose and what was interesting. And then I think as well, I can be a dog with a bone that when things just don't quite feel right to me. And I think that I was reading a lot of this research on the ways that hormones influence behavior. And I was thinking, there's just something missing here, or we don't have the whole story. A lot of it just didn't sit quite right. And so I wanted to sort of dig into that instinct, I think.
Well, let's dive into the deep end of some of the topics we're going to talk about. And they're ones that are getting a lot of attention online these days. So we're going to start with the idea of cycle syncing. And I was looking at how interest in this topic has boomed. It's had a huge growth in search word interest over the last few years, and TikTok, I gather, is flooded with the cycle syncing hashtag. But before we get into your research, could you give us a bit of a definitional focus on what cycle syncing is?
Yeah, absolutely. I think broadly, cycle syncing is this idea that there are natural hormone fluctuations that happen across the menstrual cycle, and cycle syncing is kind of tapping into those different phases or the different hormone profiles, and essentially trying to get the most out of the body depending on what those hormones might look like. So, for example, resting during menstruation and towards the end of the cycle, and then trying to prioritize being really active, very social, trying to put the things that you need to really invest your energy into closer to when you're fertile. So it's really just about following the natural ebbs and flows of the cycle to get the most out of the female body.
I see a lot of this online related to fitness. So I think my algorithm kind of knows that I'm into fitness. So my feed is flooded with kind of exercise and running, and then soccer for my kids. But then you also get these like cycle syncing messages around planning out your exercise regime according to these daily or monthly hormonal fluctuations. Why do you think we're so eager to think that our cycle can be so influential to our daily potential?
Cycle syncing isn't a new concept. It's actually something that has been in many cultures for a long time. And it's this idea that female bodies require different things at different times in the cycle. And so it is a bit of like a resurgence of this idea. I think there's a lot to like about cycle syncing. I think that women in general are really tapping into and like latching onto this idea that female bodies are different. And I think it's really important to say that there are a lot of similarities between male and female bodies. But it is definitely, as a woman, it's, you know, someone with a female body, it's nice to feel seen and heard. And for a long time, I think that women were often seen as small men. But there are differences. You know, there are physiological differences in things like strength between men and women. But then there are also differences in our energetic systems, the way that hormones change, not just across the cycle, but across the day. Yeah, women are not small bodies. There are differences. And I think that there's a lot of popularity with these voices. Women are being listened to in that way that they haven't been before.
But do you think some of the TikTok craze around, say, cycle syncing with exercise, right? So only do your high intensity training at this time of the month and do your slow walks and recovery at this time of the month. Do you think they're making too much of the potential differences that hormones and those fluctuations can make over the month?
Yeah, definitely. I think that when you really dig into the research and you look at what the studies are actually showing, there are some differences, but they're small. And they can be more related to like broader energetic things, the depletion of iron around menstruation that is likely to be just as strong a predictor of energetic demands compared to, say, elevated progesterone and estradiol. And those are the two main hormones that change across the cycle. I think it's potentially problematic over like having too much of an emphasis on cycle syncing. I think if it works for you, then absolutely go ahead and do it. But if you're a woman and you're thinking, this just doesn't quite feel right for me, and I'm spending a lot of time trying to plan around my cycle and I'm not seeing too much difference, then that's okay too, because the differences, if any, are small.
And it might be more about tapping into just how you feel, right? So if you've had a good sleep and you're feeling energetic, go for it. If you're tired, ease back. And it kind of reminds me of an episode we did around sleep, and Amy Jordan and Natalia Brumley were talking about sleep trackers, and when people get too obsessed about the numbers in sleep tracking, that kind of defines how they feel. And if you give people fake feedback, they feel like the fake feedback suggests they should feel. And I think sometimes this can happen with the cycle syncing, that you get too kind of obsessed with the tracking app and let that guide your behavior rather than just saying, hey, how do I feel today?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's any risk when you get an entire population to come down to an average. So, you know, if you've got, if you're using a cycle tracking app that says that you're fertile on this day and your peak estradiol is on this day, that is based on an average algorithm. That's not based on your own hormonal profile, which can be shaped by lots of things. And it's not just average over like an entire population. It's also over all of the cycles that have ever been tracked, which I think is really important. So some people have short cycles, some people have longer cycles. Some people are more likely to ovulate close to the start of their cycle, some towards the end. And so that's why there's so much variability in how the cycle affects people across time. And there's also emerging research that people are just sensitive to different hormones. So, for example, one of the main cycle syncing ideas is that you should be energetic in the start of the cycle, or the follicular phase, and then rest in the luteal phase. But for some women, actually, the follicular phase, where estradiol is elevated, is actually when they feel most fatigued. And then they feel pretty good in the luteal phase when progesterone is high. And you don't need to understand all of the exact like hormone patterns, but just that different bodies are sensitive to different hormones, and that listening to your own body is definitely going to be the best strategy.
So you're talking a lot about how maybe some of the advice about cycle syncing doesn't match all people particularly well. How does this all relate to women who might have particular challenges with their cycles, such as those who've got endometriosis or PMDD? And maybe you can explain what PMDD is as part of your answer.
Yeah, sure. So PMDD, or premenstrual dysphoric disorder, is essentially just a more extreme version of PMS. So it's a sensitivity to most likely progesterone withdrawal at the end of the cycle. There's a lot we don't know about it still, but basically some women are extremely sensitive to that hormone change towards the end of the cycle. They can be extremely irritable. There's a high degree of rejection sensitivity, so social interactions become more challenging. There are physical symptoms, but the main things are mood related. And, diagnosis with PMDD can include things like suicidality for just 4 or 5 days of the month, but every month, and that alleviates as soon as menstruation begins or like very soon after. And I think that this is a really important avenue for future research, but in the same way that not everyone experiences PMS or premenstrual dysphoric disorder at the same intensity, the same is probably true for other effects of the menstrual cycle. So maybe you're very lucky and you don't have any variation. Maybe you get to the end of the cycle every month and you don't have any mood disruption or any physical symptoms. Maybe you don't even know where you're at in your cycle. Their exercise is the same the whole way through. Maybe their sleep patterns don't change across the cycle. But then at the other end, there are people who are very sensitive to their hormones, and understanding that spectrum, I think, is going to be really important for really understanding all of these things. Yeah, so mood, exercise, sleep, anything that could potentially be linked to hormone change.
And we're obviously not suggesting that people with those conditions just kind of exercise through it or toughen up or any of those sorts of things, but just about listening to their bodies. And if they're feeling okay, go for it. If not, have a rest, but more about listening to their own bodies rather than relying on apps and trackers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the things that makes me nervous about tracking is that when people don't listen to their own bodies, they might be thinking, I'd really like some social support right now, but my app is telling me that I should be restful and spending time by myself. I think that has potential to be dangerous. Maybe the best thing that they need in that moment is social connection or exercise. I think you are the expert on your body. No one else can tell you the best thing.
But you can understand how they rely so much on apps. And I do it the same with my, I have a smartwatch and it tells me, I track my steps per day and all these things. So we're so addicted to the data and it feels personalized. But as you say, these period tracking apps or cycle syncing apps are not necessarily linked to you individually. They're just averages.
Yeah, definitely. I will say that the more that you use them, the better that they can be. I think one of the real advantages of tracking your cycle is that if you do begin to feel particularly moody or irritable and you check your app or maybe you have like a manual recording system and you think, okay, well, I'm coming into that phase, that can be really useful, I think, because then you can take that kind of communication into your relationships to say, hey, I'm just feeling a little irritable. It might be tied to this thing. That could be really helpful. But yeah, I think that especially when you start using them, you're going to be push towards the averages and not necessarily where your body is at.
The other topic that gets a lot of attention in this space is, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, but when women are in their fertile window, where these kind of fierce, status-driven, high-powered, hyper-competitive achievers, and then in our luteal phase, we just kind of shrivel into the background. And it's a compelling story, but is there any science to this change in kind of competitiveness or status seeking?
Yeah, this is a question that really piqued my interest and sort of where my PhD went in the direction of. I think I wouldn't say that women, shrivel into the background during the luteal phase, but it's definitely part of a system that's designed to help you get the most out of your body at any given moment. One of the things that is helpful to think about hormones and bodies in general is this idea of trade-offs. Giraffes' necks are long, and they're designed, or they have evolved in that way so that the giraffes can get to the leaves on the trees. But they can't be too long, because obviously then they couldn't run from predators and things like that. The same is true for hormones and people. And when we think about trade-offs between this like extremely highly driven, very motivated periods of the cycle compared to more restful, it's what is the benefit or the trade-off between those different hormone profiles? And the competition literature is based on this idea that it's safest and maybe most advantageous to use a lot of energy at the start of the cycle, and to be more restful at the later end. And the reason for that is that pregnancy can only occur after ovulation, in that later part of the cycle. And so the main sort of like leading theoretical arguments are that women should be restful in the later part of the cycle, because the woman's body could either be pregnant or it's preparing to go through the fertility cycle again. But that's the main like theory between this like really driven part of the cycle and then a more restful one. Yeah.
So when you talk about competition, I mean, the image that will be in a lot of people's heads, if they can get the image of a extremely long-necked giraffe out of their heads, will be, aggressive competition like sports people or finance traders or things like that. But your work defines competitiveness a lot more broadly. Can you explain how?
Yeah, for sure. So the hyper-competitiveness is part of it, absolutely. So that's like a desire to win, to beat other people, to be the best at something, whatever that something may be. But there's also competition actually takes place in a lot of different ways. The main area of research of this kind of work that looks at hormone behavior, looks at things like mating competition. Are women engaging in behaviors that attract a mate more aggressively, so during that fertile window? So things like beautification, how do you present yourself? Are you more flirtatious with mating opportunities, or typically men? But it also is much broader than that. And we rarely think of competition in this way, but things like gossip are a very common strategy that women use to compete, because if I'm gossiping about someone, I'm trying to destroy their reputation, or I'm doing something intentionally to make myself seem better than someone else. And that's the kind of things that we looked at as well. So it wasn't just winning and beating others. It was this idea of like reputational damage or self-promotion. And then finally, just like a general achievement motivation, like a desire to be better than you were yesterday or to improve at something. So yeah, it's definitely not just winning in competitions that are like I beat you, but broadly like I am good.
And better, yeah.
Yeah.
But with your competitive research, am I right in saying that the kind of pop psychology or TikTok psychology story of cycle-based competitiveness didn't really play out, but there was a bit of a plot twist that you found when it came to hormonal contraceptives?
Yeah, exactly. So we did find some effects of fertility on competition, but they tended to be more of that later one. So the broad, like, I just feel like I want to try today. I'm motivated to be better than I was yesterday. There was some evidence of that around fertility, being higher around fertility. We found less of the hyper-competitiveness, and in our research, we didn't find anything related to those more broad, beautification processes. But yeah, so what we found about hormonal contraceptives was that they were associated with reduced competitiveness. So in my early work, we weren't able to say that there's a causal relationship. It's very difficult to manipulate contraceptive use because women know that they're on it. So you can't really do a double-blind study. So we were able to see that there was an association between contraceptive use and reduced competitiveness, but we couldn't say why. But in the final study of my PhD, we brought people into the lab and we actually tested their hormones. And what we were interested in understanding was whether or not people who were versus were not using hormonal contraceptives, was there a difference in the ways that their hormones responded across a competitive task? And what we found was there was, in a really interesting way. So it's not well known fact about hormonal contraceptive use in the general population, but scientists know this very well, that hormonal contraceptive users have elevated cortisol levels chronically. So their cortisol is elevated relative to people who are not using hormonal contraceptives. And therefore, when you induce a stressful situation, their cortisol doesn't change. It doesn't increase in the way that we're expecting it to, because it's already elevated. Typically, not everyone, but that's like the pattern that we see. Whereas for naturally cycling participants, if you put them in a stressful situation, cortisol rises. We didn't know what would happen with progesterone. So progesterone also changes in response to social settings. And we found that for naturally cycling participants, there was an increase from before to after the task that we didn't see in hormonal contraceptive users. What's interesting is that it suggests that hormonal contraceptives are hijacking the systems that are designed to respond to the environment. So it does suggest that there is some kind of like mechanistic thing that's actually happening with people who use different kinds of hormonal contraceptives, in that it's stopping them from responding in this adaptive way.
That's so fascinating, and it's not at all expected. I mean, I think it's not, as you say, it's not widely known.
No.
So what should people who are taking hormonal contraception take from this research?
I think it's a good question. Similar patterns have been observed since in other studies, especially for that progesterone effect. That's like quite novel. And I also want to say that I definitely don't think that hormonal contraceptives are bad. I think that that's important. They are an extremely useful tool. But I think that people should be aware of the non-clinical side effects of taking contraceptives. You know, we go into the doctors and they'll say, we're going to test your blood pressure. There's an increased risk of stroke. There may be some mood effects, but it's the most prescribed drug in the world. And we have very limited understanding of these non-clinical effects of contraceptives. And I think that that's a problem. What should individual women take away? I think it comes back to that same thing. Like, if you know your body better than anyone else, and if you're prescribed a contraceptive, or, if you have an Implanon or an IUD and you think, I don't feel great on this, I think listen to that and go back and either try something different, because different contraceptives have different ways that they act on the body. But I think, be empowered to go back and say, this isn't working for me and I'd like to try something different.
And so for your research, is the hormonal contraceptive just, say, the pill, or what would commonly be referred to as the pill, or would it also include Implanon and hormonal IUDs?
We just don't know. Yeah, so even this was crazy to me when I first understood it, but for a long time we've thought that hormonal contraceptives function by stopping ovulation, but there's actually some evidence that some kinds of contraceptives you are still likely to ovulate on, particularly the IUD, or anything that's more on the progesterone only side of things. So I think we just need more research looking at different kinds of contraceptives. They function very differently in the body. So even though you still ovulate, they prevent pregnancy by making the environment inhospitable for a fertilized egg. But how they influence other things like mood in particular, but also just general behavior, we just don't really know.
And then just taking all of that back to that idea of drive or competitiveness. So is it fair to say that that's less of a difference across the cycle, but maybe there's some difference depending on if you're on a hormonal contraceptive or not?
I think that the whole picture is nuanced and needs more research. Like, for example, some things appear to be across the board and others appear to be specific to a difference at a certain time in the cycle. So, for example, people who are not on hormonal contraceptives experience pretty robustly an increase in sexual desire around fertility. So when they're fertile, more interested in having sex. There are other things like the competitiveness effect that appear to be more across the board. So it depends on the behavior, I think, as to whether or not it's like a full cycle effect or something specific.
But in some ways that's kind of appealing that women don't have to worry about kind of, oh, I won't go for this business pitch because I'm in this period of my cycle. So we still want to empower women to feel more basing their kind of behaviours on how they're feeling and not just where they are in their cycle, because it kind of feels like we're in this world of over-optimization where it'd be like, well, I'm in this period of my cycle, so I'm going to do that business pitch on that day. And in a way, it's kind of more empowering to say, I don't have to be so beholden to the cycle and be a little bit more aware of what we're actually kind of experiencing.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've heard some pretty bold things about cycle syncing, where someone said, oh, I can't go to that event because I'm in this phase, or I won't go for my promotion because it's, in this particular window and I won't advocate for myself. I think don't let it stop you from doing things. But equally, if there's like a positive coming from it, if you are in that window where you think you're excelling and you think that you will advocate better for yourself in that window, then maybe schedule a promotional meeting then, not just because of the science, but if it's helping you feel like, I feel really good on this day and I'm going to go in there and sell myself the best that I can, then that might be helpful, but don't not do things because of it, I think. Yeah.
So ride that placebo effect to success.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we often try to end up with some practical takeaways, and I think you've maybe said this already, but you can maybe expand. So I think you're suggesting that maybe people shouldn't rely as much on the cycle syncing apps to tell them how creative or how competitive or how strong they are at any given day. So what should they be listening to instead?
I think listen to what feels right for you. I think if you read there are a lot of books out there now. There's a lot of pop psychology, telling you to do or not do something, whether it's a particular day or, doing something at all. Like, there are a lot of women out there now who are choosing not to use hormonal contraceptives because of some research that's out there. And I think it's just so important to listen to what your needs are for that moment. If being on a contraceptive for 6 years at that particular time in your life is the right decision, then that's the right decision for you. And equally, if you feel like you're listening to the apps and it's not working for you, then trust your gut. I think listen to your body and advocate for yourself with the knowledge about how your system works.
I think it's also about being aware of what works on TikTok as well, or on the social media algorithms, right? Like, it's very easy to craft this message about cycle syncing and make it very engaging for viewers or social media users. And it's a little bit less engaging to say, hey, just listen to your body and do what feels right. So I think it's also about being a little bit cynical of the kind of the stuff that gets traction on social media. So on that, what's one piece of kind of viral folklore that you'd like to debunk?
I think the one that comes up all of the time that I find can be problematic is this idea that women are attracted to more masculine men at a certain time in the cycle. So usually the narrative is that women are attracted to masculine men when they're fertile, and it's this idea that they have better genes and that it gets messy, but there's all kinds of things about like extramarital or extra partner. So you're attracted to other people more during the fertile phase. That whole research area is a bit spotty. There's some mixed results in that area. And I think that people should just be a bit critical, I think, in general. when they're reading, whether it's reading a book or a journal article. And this is like a comment on science more broadly that lots of people have made. But, there are lots of ways that we can analyze the data, and that's especially true in the menstrual cycle. There are a lot of decisions that the researchers need to make in terms of, how are you going to measure the hormones? Are you going to measure the differences across the days, or are you measuring certain windows of time? And those issues around, manipulating the data to sell a certain story, they can be we're very vulnerable to that in the menstrual cycle research, because there are so many different ways that you can look at the data. And so I think, just being cautious when you're reading these things, and how things are easily sold on social media. Yeah.
What happened to that whole finding about women wearing red during ovulation? Did that bear up, or was that one of these myths?
It's definitely, it goes into the I would be skeptical box. Yeah, I don't want to say for sure that it's not a thing. But, and there's other things like when you come off of contraceptives, you're not attracted to your partner. And or if you change your contraceptive during your time with a particular partner, that you may or may not be attracted to them anymore. I think, situate that within the bigger picture. How long have you been together? Are there, are you investing in that relationship compared to a newer, more exciting partner? Like, all of those things should be thought about in the context of that kind of research, not just, am I wearing red? And is my partner less masculine today than he was yesterday? Yeah.
Lindsay, this is all very fascinating. So what's next for you in this research space?
There's a couple of things. We're interested in understanding, going back to this idea of trade-offs, this idea of what are you trading off with? The long neck is energy, back to the giraffe example. But perhaps there's like a trade-off between affiliation and competition. So, if you're more competitive at one time in the cycle, even just a little bit, is there some kind of trade-off with some kind of like reparative or affiliative processes? So we're using the same methods that we used in the PhD. We conduct these extensive longitudinal designs where we're tracking people across the whole cycle and asking, do you feel connected to people? Are you motivated to spend time with them? And trying to see what that looks like. And then definitely back to Nick's point earlier, trying to increase our understanding of differences between people. So things like PMDD and just, I guess, trying to get people to hold on to this idea that just because you're not the average doesn't mean that your cycle's not normal.
Oh, fascinating research, Lindsay. Thank you for joining us on PsychTalks.
Thanks, guys.
That was Lindsay Arthur speaking about hormones, behaviour, and what the science actually says about cycle syncing and competitiveness.
If you'd like to learn more about Lindsay's work, including her research on hormones and behaviour, we'll include links in the show notes.
PsychTalks is produced by Mairead Murray, Gemma Papril and Celia Harvey, with audio engineering by Phil Shaw. It is a production of the University of Melbourne, Australia. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, follow or subscribe so you don't miss out, and share it with a friend.